Yo, what's going on today, guys? It's your boy Zazo, and I'm back again for another video. So in this video, I'm gonna go over how I would learn to code from scratch if I had to start all over again. This video is gonna give you tips in order to avoid all the mistakes that I have and give you a more clean, straightforward path on how to learn code. In this video, I'm going to use Python as my example, but you could use any other programming language or framework that you want to learn, and you can just substitute it in. The first thing I would do is find a beginner's guide. So I wouldn't jump straight into learning any type of concepts. Make sure you have everything set up correctly. So find a guide that has how to install Python or whatever language or setup you're trying to do, how to actually download and use an IDE. IDE just stands for Integrated Development Environment, and then how to configure all of your different tools first before diving or trying to dive into any of the actual programming concepts, because you might get errors just because your configuration isn't correct, not necessarily because you're doing something wrong. Alright, so for the second thing that I would do is I would learn the basics of code, and I would focus on understanding these concepts instead of just the syntax. Of course, syntax is important, but I would focus on learning the concepts of things like data types, operators, conditionals, variables, looping, and then other things like lists, dictionaries, sets, and also functions. So I would learn all of those things, but with each one I would do a practice session. So what I mean by that is, you can watch a video on one of these things. If you would like me to make a video or tutorial on any of these concepts, please leave it in the comments below. But for example, if I want to learn about variables, the first thing I would do is do a little YouTube tutorial or any type of tutorial, any learning resource that you have available to you. I would do that for that specific subject, and then after I watch the video, I would try to practice it on my own. All of these you should be doing along with the instructor or whoever is leading that training. You should be coding along. Don't just sit there and watch them do it, because the best way to learn is through doing when it comes to coding. So the next thing after you've learned all of those concepts that I mentioned in the previous step, I would say build something very simple that's text-based, trying to use a combination of all those different things. So something like a text-based game, or some type of thing like I believe it's like a Dungeons and Dragons things where certain questions lead to certain outcomes, that type of thing, because that'll give you a good hold of variables, if statements, functions, and those type of things. If there are any of these concepts that you don't understand, there's nothing wrong with spending a little bit more time on that specific concept and just kind of reiterating it until it really sticks in your mind. That is the thing that I wish I did. I moved on from, all these different concepts in loops, not necessarily a for loop. For loop made sense, but like while loop, that kind of threw me for a loop. But the thing is that I moved past it, and then when I needed to use a while loop, I was trying to use it in such a way that wasn't right. So make sure that especially these concepts are really getting in deep down and you're really grasping them, because if you don't, it's going to cause problems for the future, because there are a lot of different other concepts and things that you will need to internalize that are far more complex than these. But these are the foundation of those other ones. You need to understand those other ones in order to kind of go on and go forward. The fourth thing that I would do is actually learn web development with Python specifically. If you're learning another language, try to learn something that has a visual element as well as a back-end element. If you're going strictly for something that's more back-end, a lot of these languages still have some type of graphical user interface that you can use in order to kind of set up. It might not be the best looking, but that's fine. It's just for learning. So specifically with Python, what I would do is I would learn web development, because there are a couple different frameworks that you can use in order to set up a website really fast and easy. And that way you get the front end and how the front end works. As a byproduct, you'll use some HTML and those type of things, CSS, but you'll also be able to learn the front end, so with visual, because a lot of us are visual learners, and then also see how the back end ties in with the front end, which was another downfall of mine. I didn't understand how the two worked together, so that was a big gap in my learning when I was coming up and trying to learn to code. I want to be a back-end developer, front-end developer, and I realized like I was this close from just being able to like merge the two, and I didn't have to segment myself on back-end or front-end. I could focus time on the one I wanted to do more, but still be able to do like front-end, very simple design, or use templates, or use different components that are already set out there for you, so I don't have to reinvent the wheel, but I can focus on the back-end and the stuff that I actually wanted to do. So in order to understand how the front and the back end work, you need to understand like HTTP requests and requesting stuff from APIs. Depending on how you're doing this, you can pull stuff from existing APIs, you can build your own API and do something with that. But in order to do that, you need to understand HTTP requests and how they kind of work together. There is a module in Python called request or requests. Either way, it's one of them, and it has some built-in functionality to actually make that a lot easier. In this step, you really would want to lean on documentation, Google and documentation. Documentation mostly because it has everything in there for you, but you can lean on Google at this point because you're supposed to be doing this on your own, not necessarily following along with the Python, whatever programming language tutorial. At this point, you're supposed to be kind of getting the hang of it and starting to actually build something out for yourself. It doesn't have to be anything huge, but it should be something that's actually, in the real world, like you can make. Well, the first thing I did with Python is I made a basic website with Flask. Flask is very fast to basically whip up a website really quick. So that's why I would suggest Flask if you're going with Python. Like I said, do not overcomplicate this. If you're going with another language, don't overcomplicate it. Just get something up and running that's good, that works, and then you can kind of play with it from there. You can play with the front end if you like front end more. Play with back end if you like back end more, and kind of test things out and see what things do, and then go from there. If you want to start getting a little more complex, especially in Python, Django is a more complex framework. It is a good framework, but it is a little bit more complex on how you configure and how you set things up. Flask is pretty ready to go, easy to understand, pretty lightweight, and then you just go from there. All right, so number 5, I would start learning about object-oriented programming, OOP as it's known as, or any other concept that's more kind of advanced at that point. At this point, you should know a lot of the other stuff like the back of your hand. You start diving into OOP, and you kind of know how to set out different modules and functions. You learn how to basically build architecture, clean code, reusable code, more or less. For a book, I read Clean Code and Clean Architecture. Those are some 2 good books, but I haven't read a lot of programming and tech books lately. So those are 2 that I would say you can read. Are those the best to read? I don't know at this point. It's been a couple years since I've read them, but Clean Code and creating clean code, modular code, advanced concepts like OOP and other concepts, depending on what object-oriented, as long as your language supports object-oriented programming, then you'll be able to learn this concept in whatever different language. So this is the end of the video. I want you to like the video, subscribe, and leave me a comment. If you want me to do tutorials on those basic concepts and even go to even more complex concept, I can do that. You just gotta let me know. If you don't want it, I won't give it. All right, so love, peace, and chicken grease. I'll see you on the next one.